Welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where two men in the middle of the country get together and talk about politics, current events, and other fun stuff. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Koenig.
So, Brandon, as we warmed up again, we were trying to figure out how you squeeze everything that's happened this really in the last 48 hours into one coherent 1 hour podcast, and that's going to be a challenge.
That will be, yeah. I had a mental list running of just minor things to talk about, latest polls and the presidential race, just soft things, and then boom, now we don't even need to struggle to talk about.
It was going to be kind of
things.
dry with polling, and do we want to rehash Biden again and what his poll number mean? But we've got a whole new set of topics to run down.
So much to talk about.
Let's start with Jon Stewart, and we kind of warmed up with this. What Jon Stewart did at a House subcommittee on Tuesday, Wednesday?
Yeah, Tuesday. His testimony. So for those that don't know, Jon Stewart for several years now has been an advocate working with 9/11 first responders, firefighters, police, and NYPD, basically trying to ensure that they get the health care they deserve.
Yeah.
And it's a really sad story because many of them went directly into the smoke, into the fire to rescue people.
Yeah.
And, they were told initially when they, came with respiratory illnesses and cancer that, they were crazy and that it wasn't due to the ground zero and the aftermath of that. And then science has proven now that it is due to that. Many of them have already died. Many of them are still struggling with cancer. I believe he threw out the number 7 out of 10 have cancer.
Yeah.
And our government hasn't guaranteed them health care. I mean, it's a fight every year, every few years for them to continue to get the funding so that their health care is covered. And for those that didn't see it, it's on YouTube. You can Google it.
It's a great 9-minute video.
Yes, very powerful. I mean, Jon breaks down. He shows emotion. He shows anger at the fact that they have to be there and fight. And I think what's most infuriating is that they're in an empty committee room, basically.
Yes, and I think what we talked about is we talked about when you're angry sometimes, or when you get that emotional, you lose the argument.
You do, because how do you control
down.
it? You need
Absolutely.
to be balanced in how you show anger, and he did it very well.
Yes.
He manifested that anger, but he did it calmly and did not get off track, did not yell, did not criticize, and he was able to showcase that anger while bringing it back to the topic and keeping it focused on the first responders and what he was doing for them.
It's a great point. He never made that about himself.
Right.
And I think a phrase that's overly used is kind of finding your authentic voice. What he did was authentic to who he was, what he was feeling at the time, and that kind of comes through very powerfully. What I like too is he said something. I think that he said a lot of things. I think most Americans wish that if they were sitting in front of Congress, the Senate, the government in general, that they could articulate the anger, the frustration, the hypocrisy. He starts off with what a visual metaphor this is. There's 9/11 heroes behind me that are dying of sickness. I'm in the middle, and we came here today to talk to no one because half the committee didn't even bother to show up.
Well, yes, and he pointed out the hypocrisy and how clear it was.
It's a great line.
He had a line about the fact, that everybody was tweeting out, never forget, and they wear, the pins. And then, those same congressmen and women don't even show up. Like when push comes to shove, they don't care. And I think that was very powerful. He also mentioned that on average, it took 5 seconds for the first responders to get to ground zero to assist the victims. And so, that parallel 5 seconds, they acted so fast, and yet we can't act, to save them and help them in their time of need. What does that say about our country? What does it say about our government?
He talked about the pile that, again, what made them sick is that pile of rubble. And something that he said that I've thought a lot about since watching that video is those men and women are what reminded us what's still left in America worth fighting for. The role that the firefighters and the police and the first responder played with helping us kind of move on as a country and put some of our identity back together after that attack can never be downplayed.
Not at all.
That's something, he said a great line. This isn't a New York issue.
No. Al-Qaeda attacked America.
That's right.
Right.
They didn't yell death to Tribeca. They
Right.
yelled death to America. And if there's things worth fighting for, if there's something worth remembering about what's great in this country, I would really challenge you to give me a better example than those people and what they did on that day. And
Right.
for our country to treat them this way and make them go through all of this at a time of need is just,
It's appalling.
there's no excuse for it.
Well, and I feel like over the years I've heard about this and the fact that they've struggled to get this, but it's never received the attention that it's due and the national audience. And Jon Stewart was able to do that. He was able to get everybody's attention, draw their attention to this. And I thought it was either his last line or second to last line, but he said the tables should be flipped.
Yeah.
Congress should
Absolutely.
be sitting on this side. We should be up there asking them questions and questioning them about this. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's just, again, it shows the disconnect right now between the government, we've talked about this, the legislative branch, and the citizens that are supposed to be served by, those congressmen and women. And it was very powerful, very relatable.
And we talked about, we're two members of the House on that committee. Don't we call each other up and say, hey, Brandon, here comes an easy win our way.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's promote bipartisan support for this. We both get some really good press out of it. This is a win-win-win. If I were most of the people that didn't show up to that committee, I think everybody that didn't show up to that committee was a Republican. And I'm making an assumption here that this was a budgetary complaint or protest that they had against this. Wouldn't I choose to pick that battle somewhere else?
You would. And
why here?
And frankly, that reasoning is BS because, that's selective outrage, right? There are plenty of other areas of the budget that you can critique and that you can argue against. This is something that should not be debatable. And so for any Republican to make this their cause celeb, that this is what they're going to stake their ground on, is just indefensible.
And if I'm a senior member of the House, Republican side, and you're a member of the House on that subcommittee, don't you think I'd give you a call the day before and say, hey, Brandon, let's make sure you're at that committee.
Right. How did they not think about the optics
We've got a
of
national celebrity who is garnering attention on this. I don't want this to get out of control.
Right.
Let's show up there and make sure we make a presence. This can naturally flow into our next topic, which is our president and the interview that he just gave.
Congress is tone deaf. The president is tone deaf.
Take just politics 101. Optics 101, branding 101, marketing 101. Hey, here's a situation that instead of creating now a shitstorm that we have to deal with, a minimal amount of effort could have avoided the Republican side and that whole thing that we just talked about with Jon Stewart,
right?
And now with the president and what he's going through, because in an interview he got asked the simplest question of all time. Hey, Brandon, as a sitting president, would you take research if a foreign country called you and said, I've got some dirt on one of your opponents? Would you take that call? That's a universal
no.
Absolutely
easy
not.
No.
It's an easy no. It's not even a thought.
We just survived, a investigation, special
he just
counsel
got investigated for it.
That gripped the nation for the last couple of years, on this very subject, on foreign interference in our elections. And here we have a president saying that, he would use information that was given to him, which, again, you get beyond the surface level of that. That's appalling because that message that is sent from the leader of the free world, it's almost like an open invitation, a license to those foreign powers. Hey, feel free to dig in and see what you can find. Again, I mean, you would think that after what he did with WikiLeaks, against Hillary in 2016, that, he would have, walked back now after everything that was thrown at him.
After dodging, in some ways, a bullet, where the Mueller report said there was no reason really. The Mueller report, I think, included there was no collusion because they didn't have to ask the Russians to collude. They were already doing it.
Yeah.
They were already invested in helping him. So on top of that 2-year investigation and the ongoing political fallout of that, you can't field that question better than what he did. Again, we've asked this question a dozen times. How do you process that? How do you take that interview and how do you wrap that answer to that's the president of the United States and here's how that impacts my view of him and potentially what I might do with my vote?
Well, you look at it from the standpoint of here is an individual who believes that the law doesn't apply to him, that he doesn't have boundaries, that there aren't limits.
There's no way you could argue anything other than that now.
That's the takeaway. And he is somebody who seems content to apply, his freedoms that he enjoyed in the business world and his ability to act and do however he wanted to act, with no recourse, because in the business world he could always settle.
Yeah,
and he did that frequently, and he could operate with basically immunity. And so he has taken that to the White House and doesn't seem to understand that there are built-in constraints on executive power, but that doesn't even enter into the lexicon with him at all.
Let's put it into this bucket of things that Trump has said that you just outlined. Shows a utter lack of understanding of how the United States government works. Shows an utter lack of understanding of the responsibilities of the president, and makes himself out to be just buffoonish in nature. That bucket is overfilling now over 2.5 years of the Trump presidency.
Right.
What impact, if any, do you think stuff like this has? And I think we broke it down to, you got your hardcore Trumpers. They're not, they could care less.
They're not moving.
They're going to root this on. This is great. He made libs in the mainstream media lose their minds. That's what I'm here for. Let's go. You have midstream centrist Republicans like yourself, who I think you've kind of already said, I don't know if I can vote for Trump.
I can't vote for Trump.
You're looking
I'll just put that out there.
You're looking for whatever plausible alternative, and you are never going to pivot back to Trump at this point.
Not going to happen. Yeah.
So is it that 20-25% maybe of independents who were, again, candidate dependent? They were Trump triers. They weren't really that impressed with Hillary. They liked this kind of outsider drain the swamp story that he told, and kind of went that way. Does this have any impact on them?
I think it would. He had a layer of soft support, people that supported him just because they really opposed both candidates, and they were under this impression, let's shake things up some. Anecdotally, there's been many stories out there where, people in Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin have been interviewed that did support Trump the first time around, and now they're, disappointed, they regret their vote. So those people exist. The question is, I don't know, how large that group is, what percent of
that's a good point.
Trump support they account for. But yes, this would be one of the things that I would think moves the needle. There's a lot of noise, and I think that, I think independents, moderate Republicans, Democrats that oppose the president, what they deem anti-Trumpers. I think the challenge has been that Trump throws so much out there, and it's easy to latch onto every little thing.
Yeah.
And then it all becomes noise, and people start to just tune it out. This is one of those things that is not just noise. This is something that should rise above everything else and should be hit and hammered over and over and over and over again, that this not only is outside of democratic norms, this is dangerous. This is national security issue that basically Trump is putting our election security in complete danger in 2020.
And doesn't this play into the Democratic narrative of this guy is just too much of a loose cannon?
He's reckless. He's irresponsible.
He's spontaneous. He's irresponsible. Doesn't things like this just feed directly into what the Dems are going to be hammering on from now until November 2020?
Completely. And they need to find the right way to package that and focus on the top issues and statements that Trump has given them, and not get bogged down into the weeds on all of the little things. It needs to be focused on reckless, dangerous. Our national security is at stake. We need to pivot. This is not what America is.
And that may be Trump's saving grace and the Democrats, if they lose this, their downfall. We just couldn't, there was so much in that bucket. We just maybe couldn't find what really was important versus what was white noise. Because if you pick the wrong thing,
right,
now you're playing more into Trump's hands of this is a witch hunt, this is vindictive. Look, I'm draining the swamp. I'm doing all these things. They're coming back at me. And I don't think Trump is smart enough to think all of that through. And that's his intentional strategy, that he's trying to throw so much at the wall that makes people think he's crazy that you won't pick the right ones out to campaign on.
No, I think it's just more of a case that the Trump acts in the moment. He says and does whatever he thinks and feels with no repercussions. And, he is focused on, himself. I mean, he does not make deliberate decisions.
No.
Does not think cogently about his actions and what impact they will have. He does not see it that way. He sees the presidency basically as kind of a one large show, and that he is leading that. And he views it in the context of ratings, which is why he keeps the rallies up and why he spins the polling, and he creates this alternative reality narrative where he's leading in all the polls, as he said the other day, and everybody likes him and everything's great, and he goes along with that. And doesn't deviate when he's called out, when the facts completely come into conflict. It doesn't matter because facts don't enter into it. He sees himself as putting a narrative out there. It's a show, and it's about being able to just stay behind that narrative and see if that'll take him through.
And we talked, there was no strategy around this. This was Trump just in the moment. He heard something that may possibly be interpreted as a question that gets to that core, you are illegitimate because of Russian interference. And he immediately jumps to this. I didn't do anything. Everybody does this. This is legal.
I was going to say, that's
this
other
is normal behavior.
That's what the other comment is. He said it was legal, and he said everybody does it.
So
he just throws these generalities
illegal
out there. It's not illegal, but again, I think it's wrong. And again, it really depends on, what type of assistance you accept. I mean, if you could get very granular, you can't accept money from a foreign power, to carry out some of those actions. That would be illegal.
Trade you something of value for it.
So, foreign election interference by a foreign entity is very broad. There are aspects of that could be illegal depending on what form it takes. But for him to just come out and say everybody does it, like this is normal. No, it's not normal. It's not normal in the least.
In a classic Trump fashion, there is that everybody does this and this is totally normal. I'm pretty sure the dude from Al Gore's campaign, when they found W's debate prep book, they called the FBI.
Right.
Because they didn't know. I think that just got misplaced and they found it. I don't think somebody stole it.
No, it wasn't stolen. It was left behind.
We're not even risking this.
Right.
We're calling the FBI, which is the right thing to do.
That's a responsible campaign. That's what they do.
Responsible thing to do. That's how a normal human being in a normal campaign should operate. The other thing is he put out this ridiculous tweet today where he's like, well, I just talked to the Queen of England. I just talked to the Prince of Wales. Do you expect me to call the FBI every time I talk to a world leader? Nobody would talk to me. Well, that's kind of exactly not on point for what the argument is.
Yeah.
I also like that he said Prince of Wales and he spelled it like you would spell a whale.
Right.
Yeah.
He has that spelling difficulty. As an aside, if we have time, I'd like to talk about the visit with the Queen, because I think there were some weird and interesting tidbits that came out of that. Just as a
you mean his best foreign visit, the day Trump acted more presidential than any other time in his presidency, because he just didn't pull his pants down in public.
Right. Well, there's a psychological angle to that. A lot of people think that he views the Queen like he views his mother, and so there's some Oedipus complex or something going on there.
Really deep into the psychology of Donald Trump. I don't know if you want to dive that deep in.
Maybe not.
There may not be I don't know if you can pull back on the stick and get yourself out of that.
Okay, well, let's just say on a surface level, I think that he's enamored with the pageantry and the spectacle of royalty,
and he's pissed that he doesn't get that kind of treatment here.
No, but it's also unusual the fact that he brought his whole family with him and
free vacation.
Yeah,
why
vacation. Yeah,
why wouldn't you?
Which again, not the norm for that type of state visit. And he threw out there that he wanted his kids to meet with Kate and William, and Harry, and it's like, wait a second, like they don't have anything in common. You know, what would be the point of that? Because he threw out this idea of like new generation leaders, you know, which seemed to like throw out there that like his kids are going to become leaders or electeds at some point. I don't know. It was just very bizarre. And of course, that didn't go anywhere. And if you noticed, the royals, the next generation of royals, were absent. I mean, they did not take part in any of this.
Yeah, Meghan Markle didn't show up at all.
And Meghan had good reason after the president basically said that she was nasty.
Yeah, she was nasty. Have you ever called a woman nasty?
I've not, no. I don't even, I can't remember the last time I've heard that term used.
No. Other than that Janet Jackson song, Nasty, that's like the only time I've ever heard a woman use the term nasty. But that's his
go-to word for women.
Go-to
I mean, he uses that with women over and over.
Not piling on his visit, because I will give him credit. He read a speech and he was able to.
He read the speech well.
Read the speech well. Absolutely, we got to give credit where credit
his
is due.
Tendency to 100%. Break out. Yeah.
But when you're sitting there with all of the graves behind you, and it's the 75th anniversary of the Normandy invasion, can you just put it away for 10 minutes?
The politics,
can you just not make it about yourself and just say, I am in awe of where I'm at, of the sacrifice, the history.
Right.
I don't want to talk about Nancy Pelosi.
The fact that he brought Nancy Pelosi up, in that context and that audience, again, why there? But again, we just can't have that decorum. What we consider normal, it's just out the window. He cannot do it.
And that gets to today or yesterday, what he said with he would take foreign aid in an election. It's just, you just never recognize.
No.
You just don't have to do that.
But I want to know,
if you didn't do that, things would be better.
They would. And I want to know if there's anybody in his inner circle that has ever
there can't be.
Well,
there can't be.
That has told him like, no, like stop, don't do this. This is wrong. Like his, like just very aggressively laid it out there. Or are they all just like in fear? And so none of them tell him what he doesn't want to hear.
I'll step you one back. When's the last time anybody in Donald Trump's life told him no? 30 years?
Good question.
25. Yeah. My wife and I have this debate all the time about CEOs.
Yeah.
Where a CEO will do something and it's just a huge head scratcher. And again, this gets maybe a little bit to Trump, where they completely misread something. They don't understand a commonly held perspective. And it's like, when's the last time somebody said, wow, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I don't know what we're doing, but I know we're not doing that.
Right. People are afraid to.
Years. And I think that combined with all of Trump's other issues gets what you have now. Who is the, I don't know if this would be his 2020 campaign manager. It's not the press secretary anymore, because we'll get to her later. What three people huddled up after that interview and said, and he does not talk to the press till November 5th, 2020. We are done. Nobody book it, nothing. If it's not Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, or Lou Dobbs, we ain't talking. We're done. Because you can't let him free range or talk to anything other than Fox right now.
You can't. I mean, it's just too risky. And that should be that Brad Pascal, his campaign manager, that guy.
Yeah.
You would think he would be involved.
And who thought it was a good idea to let him go with Stephanopoulos too?
Yeah,
I don't understand the whole thing.
Well, he rarely does those kind of major network interviews anyway, so it was a surprise to see him do one.
We debated this before. What is his psychological process to think this is the way to go? This is how I'm going to answer this question. And I would think as a politician, you're always thinking, I don't say politician is a negative. A lot of people, I think that carries some sort of negative connotation, but thinking like a politician is what you have to do to get elected, stay elected, and to be effective in a political system. What political calculation is going on in his head, if any, that says, here's why I'm going to say this, and this is the political benefit of me saying it?
I can't even begin to imagine. I think he is very short-sighted. I think that if he does make political calculations of any kind, which is a big if, considering he's extemporaneous, and just goes in the moment. I think that it's all just based, upon short term, what kind of short term reaction he's going to get with his base. And I think he only thinks in the lens of his base. I really don't think he considers anything beyond his base. And, and again, I hate to get inside Donald Trump's head because it gives me a headache.
There's no way out.
There's no way out.
And you're never going to find what you want, I don't think.
Sounds like a nightmare.
No.
But I think that part of it is delusion. I think that he... to basically prevent any type of anxiety, to prevent any type of disconnect, cognitive dissonance, he tells himself what he wants to hear, and he actually believes that after a time. So, when he was in London and he made the statement that there weren't any protesters, everybody on the street was supporting him.
There were thousands of protesters.
In some ways, I think maybe he actually believes that. Maybe he psychologically, mentally, he has driven himself to believe whatever he tells himself, and it's just because it prevents that anxiety, and it's a coping mechanism. That could be.
And is maybe the benefit of it is that he said it. Maybe that's the benefit, that my base, my supporters, they heard me say it, and that's beneficial enough.
Yeah.
There needs to be no more calculation than that. It's true, or it's believable, or it's important simply because I'm the one delivering the message, and I can deliver my message better than anybody else. And it's this force of special personality I have.
Well, and that speaks to the fact why he's contradicted so many who have served for him the past couple of years. When they've made statements and he completely contradicts them. It explains why he goes over people in his chain of command and will make statements himself. I mean, many times he's gone over Sarah Sanders, completely, and going directly to the American people and to the press. And so, I mean, this whole time, I mean, especially in the last year or so, I mean, her job has been of little consequence with the very few press briefings that have been given.
I was going to say, when's the last time you saw her at the podium delivering a press
at least a couple months ago.
Yeah, it's down to at least.
And for those of you that don't know, the norm has always been a weekly press conference. Yes. For every prior president, it's been a weekly
and
event.
A lot of them have done this almost every day or multiple times during the week.
Right. And depending on what was going on, if there's major legislation, if we've been in war, they would occur every day, but at least every week. I don't recall a past president in recent memory, as long as I've been alive, who didn't at least do it weekly.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Sarah, since she announced she's finally tapping out.
Well, Trump announced for her, right? That's how that came
But that's typically, I think, how he prefers to do that.
Right.
I'm shocked she made it as long as she did. That has to be one of the top 3 worst jobs in the United States.
Top 3 worst jobs, and then you compound that with the fact with the boss you would have in this case, and there's no relief. You're constantly putting out fires, and you either contradict the president and lose your job, or you become a propaganda spokesperson for the president, and then you lose all credibility, which he lost, I would say, with the press.
So what's Sarah Huckabee Sanders' lasting impact on that position, and how they handled the press, and what she represented maybe as press secretary? What do you think, if any, lasting change she has on that position?
Well, I think that, she diminished the role of press secretary quite a bit.
Agree. Yeah.
And the authority, the trust factor with members of the press. And so I think a lot of that will have to be rebuilt with whoever is the next president. It's going to be a tough call. I don't want to say it's tough. We've hit rock bottom, so I don't know that we can go lower. But there's a lot of rebuilding that has to be done.
Yeah.
I do think my fear, though, is that we have lost so much in terms of the norms of what we expect in terms of transparency and what the press secretary is there to do. They're there to be a spokesperson for the president and their agenda. They're not there to lie for the president and cover them. And they're not there to be a shill, and to just, and at the end, she was being compared to Baghdad Bob.
Well, I guess part of the question is, do we even need a press secretary anymore?
Well, Trump proved that we did really need one, right? He went directly to the American people.
It's all going to come directly from him and his Twitter account.
But do we really want a president to replicate what Trump has done with Twitter.
No.
I don't think that that's appropriate. I don't think that you can govern that way.
So I think the next president's not going to try to replicate that. But certainly if I'm the next president of the United States, I'm like, there are some lessons to be learned to how Trump manipulates the media and how he handled his interactions with the press.
Right.
I don't think we're going to give the next person in that office the same free reign that Trump has gotten, but I do think there's some lessons and techniques for the frequency, the amount, the style, and the vehicle for communicating that I think people are going to try to emulate moving forward.
Agree. I think that I think more than anything, it's a case study of what not to do. I do think it gives pause because I think that you could have some bad actors that look at what they could leverage in terms of what this administration has been able to do, and be able to incorporate some of that. And I think that's incumbent upon us and our elected representatives to hold the next administration more accountable, to put guardrails in place, to demand, that we are going to have a weekly or monthly press conference, that's going to just be the norm going forward, that we're not going to, have a president that chooses to evade that medium, because it's not the same. If the president gets to handpick who he speaks to, you don't have that transparency. It ceases to exist.
Yeah.
And remember, this was a president who floated the idea of creating his own news network at one time too.
Yes, which I still believe was the reason he ran.
Right. I could see him getting involved in that after. Yeah, because there was talk before the campaign was over, when a lot of his people thought he was going to lose, about just starting that up. Yeah. They started the blueprint for doing that. Yeah.
So Sarah Huckabee Sanders, bad actor or just caught in a bad situation?
It's hard to tell. I feel like maybe at the beginning she was not a bad actor, but she just completely yielded to what the administration demanded, and so over time, I think she saw herself as playing a role, and and it wasn't about ethics at all, and it was just about a job and fulfilling that job and staying on as long as she could and securing the good graces of the president.
Can you be in that role if that's how you approach it? It's just a job. I'm just here to whatever my boss, the president, mouthpieces out. I'm just the face for that. Can you make the most of what that job is supposed to be if that's your approach to it?
I don't. I think you're limited. I think that if you take a transactional approach, that's a very transactional approach to the job. I think that you're doing a disservice to the country. I mean, because you have an elevated platform, that, and not just to the, to the American electorate, but to the entire world. When you give those press conferences, I mean, there's viewership around the globe that takes heed and listens to what you say. So you should be considerate, you should be thoughtful, you should be deliberate in what you say and how you say it. And, if you are in a position where you feel like your only option is to lie, and to not say something that you knowingly know is false, then you shouldn't say something. You should deflect the question or say no comment. Too many times Sarah was just content upon, basically, mouthing whatever the administration was mouthing when it was a known lie. And then, not even ever going back on that. I mean, she never pulled back and said, this was inaccurate. She just would always double down on whatever she was put out there to say.
So Trump, let's agree that Trump can be a dynamic communicator in the right setting.
Okay.
I'm not going to call him a good speaker. I'm not going to call him dynamic is the best word I can come up with.
Okay. I see. And that word, I think dynamic is, I think that gives him too much credit.
Forceful, dynamic.
He can resonate with many people.
There are times when he gets in the right situation with the right crowd at the right time, he can resonate and he can deliver a message.
Yeah.
We'll compromise and say, okay, we pretty much 80-ish% agree with that. I think we also agree he's not the most eloquent speaker.
By far.
Yeah. By far. And I think we also agree that he has a very specific style that can come across in ways as uneducated, bombastic, and in the wrong setting, make him somebody that is very non-likable to a large portion of the crowd he's speaking to.
Right. I think
Okay.
there's a cadence and tone that also comes across as kind of thoughtless.
Yes.
Super casual, indifferent
Yeah.
at times.
Okay, so with all of that we agree on, wouldn't you want to hire a person who
Balances you out.
the most
Yeah.
eloquent, articulate, polished? Wouldn't you hire somebody and say, that's what your job is? Your job is to take what I say, which is delivered to this very thin base of folks that I am constantly out in front of delivering my shtick, and your job is to widen out that appeal to places that didn't vote for me and people that may not like me.
Yeah, that's what a good communicator, someone who wants to be an effective communicator, would do, because they know their limitations and their weaknesses. But that is incumbent on knowing your own weaknesses and recognizing them. I don't think Trump recognizes that he has any weaknesses, so hence he does not take that approach.
If I were Trump, I'd get somebody with a British accent. Because people in America love British accents.
Nigel Farage.
Not him. And it doesn't matter whatever you say. If you say it with a British accent, it always
People
sounds better.
believe it, yeah. And
It
that's why, have
always
you
sounds
noticed the
better.
increase in British accents being used
100%.
on commercials, TV ads, and voiceovers on just routine products? And you're like, okay, well, what's going on here?
Every actor wants to play a role where they get to bust out their British accent.
Right.
Are you good at accents, Brandon?
No, I mean, I haven't really tried.
I have no
frequently.
accent ability at all.
I mean, if I really try, I could probably do a British accent, but I'm not. I don't practice enough.
very
It doesn't
good.
come naturally. Yeah.
Do you find, because you've been to England a couple times, are you got a little of that ting to you when you come back, just out of, like sometimes if you spend a week and a half in the South, you get a little twang.
A
when
little.
you come
I mean,
back?
I tend to kind of enunciate a
Yeah.
little bit more, syllables, which the British do. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
little bit more emphasis in how they say vowels and like different things like that. So I did notice that coming back. It was interesting because, your syntax and the way you speak is influenced by where you live and how
100%,
long.
yeah.
So I remember, I have a friend of a friend who moved to the UK from Connecticut, and he has gradually assumed a British accent over the 5 years that he's been there.
absolutely.
And so now people just assume he's British, and then he
Yeah.
tells them he's from Connecticut, and then he's just picked it up while he's been there. I know somebody who moved to Australia and has picked up that accent.
It also works too. I had a professor in graduate school from England who'd been in the States for 35 years.
Oh, wow.
And still had the thickest English accent as the day he arrived.
Interesting. So it
Because
never
I think
dissipated.
consciously he decided, I am not losing this English accent, because one, chicks dig it, and two, it makes
True.
me sound a lot better anything that comes out of my mouth.
Yeah, there's that idea. I mean, people think you're smarter. I mean, they tend to believe somebody who's saying something in a British accent, they come across as more educated. That's been the thought for so
instead
long.
of hiring like Pierce Bronson or some other 007 actor, he basically hired somebody who took on the same speech patterns.
Yes.
You mentioned the word double down, and the same posture as he did. The thing with Sarah Huckabee Sanders is the look on her face of disgust constantly.
Disdain,
like,
yeah.
I can't believe you group of idiots are here again. Just that alone, it's like, that you don't need that. You get that out of the president from time to time, especially with the enemy of the people in front of the media. I would think, again, why are you reinforcing that by hiring somebody like Sarah Huckabee Sanders?
Yeah, I mean, she's in many ways like the female version of him.
I just reached over to straighten Brandon's mic out, so that's that weird pause. Like, what are you doing?
Gotcha. Yeah, so I mean, she comes across as bored many times in those press conferences. He comes across as bored
and hostile.
Yeah,
and just, I'm not going to say the word ugly because that is taken the wrong way, but just somebody who is having no fun, who is disgusted by all of this and just can't wait to spit out whatever reinforces whatever the president said, offer no value, and sees no value in the people in front of her. It's really hard to communicate with a group that you give off the physical impression that you hate.
Exactly, and that comes across with her constantly. So, I mean, so she's been far from an effective spokesperson for him. And, it's almost like you shrug as she's leaving now. It was almost like, it took this long. Like,
yeah, I
really?
can't. If To share a little tidbit with any listener, the hardest part of amateur podcasting is learning to talk onto a microphone. It is an absolute skill you have to learn because you have to constantly center yourself on the microphone. And if you're like me, if you talk with your hands or you bob around a lot, you're constantly moving off it. It has been way harder to record a voice off a microphone than I ever thought it would be.
Yeah, and I was doing that because I was talking at an angle, so
yeah,
we'll see how that sounds.
So there's the old phrase, when you dance with the devil don't change.
Yeah.
He changes you. To me, I have whatever happens to Sarah Sanders here on out, and there's been a lot of speculation that she's toxic, she's unemployable. She is somebody who's not typically going to parlay this experience in the White House to a career, a book, especially for a press secretary whose strength is supposed to be out in public, out in front of people. She's not going on the high-end speaker tour, I don't think.
No. And I mean, her background before this, political involvement was kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Managing campaigns. Not out in a public-facing role as a communicator. So that isn't her element. It wasn't her element to begin with. So it was an odd choice.
Yeah.
To say the least.
I think after Spicer, people do, I ain't touching that.
Yeah.
I'd love to see her book a series of like corporate speaking events at the Sarah Huckabee Sanders at the Apple, all sales national kickoff meeting as the keynote speaker or something like that.
Not going to happen.
Or she takes a tour of liberal colleges through the Northeast to talk about her time in the White House. Remember when Spicer wrote a book and tried to do some media?
Oh, yeah.
And even...
fairly quickly after he left.
Even Megyn Kelly just racked him, just brutalized him. But I think he's like, the check ain't worth it. It's not. It's not worth it from there.
Yeah, he's gone. I'm not going to say gone into hiding, but he's been quiet. I haven't heard or seen from him in a while.
He's done. Brandon, I'll put you on the spot here. Define the Hatch Amendment or the Hatch Act for us.
So the Hatch Act basically prevents federal funds for going towards abortion services. So
no, this is the Kellyanne Conway thing. That's the Hyde Amendment.
That's the Hyde. Yeah, sorry.
That's the Hyde Amendment. I know what you're thinking about. Were you going to start linking that to Biden and suddenly he's against that after like 26 years?
Well, and until last 48 hours, that was one of the issues I had in my mind to talk about the Hyde Amendment. So yeah. So sorry.
Let's stick on that for 1 second. Is Joe Biden potentially pulling a Hillary Clinton where I'm running for president because it's time for me to be president? Is he risking what I think eventually killed Clinton, that she never made the case to why she needed and the country needed her to be president? Is Biden, it's early, and I get Uncle Joe's playbook's going to be, I'm just going to lay in the weeds and let all of you kill each other. But is that a risk he's taking?
Somewhat. I think he needs to, stop calling it in. His schedule's been very light. He's been skipping out on events. I think he needs to really start ramping up his outreach and not take it for granted that just because he's sitting riding high in the polls, and actually his margin is decreasing, that he needs to, fight as if he's 20 points behind and get out there. I do think there's a key difference in that he does not have the high negatives that Hillary had, obviously.
Yes.
He doesn't have the ties to an administration that had its own scandal issues and that has been reevaluated under multiple lenses.
I think so.
And the difference too is that he has always been able to resonate with blue collar voters. That has always been a part
African
of his base.
voters.
And African American voters. Two segments that Hillary struggled with and has really kind of always struggled with. So I think that's a key difference. But all that said, I think that he needs to be forceful, get out there, and in some of these cases, he just can't afford to flip on every issue or flip multiple times. If he flips, he needs to give a sound explanation why his views have evolved. And in some cases, if he's not flipping, he needs to just say, this is why I voted the way I did. This is what we knew at the time. This was the context. This is what played into it, and I stand behind that. Because I think at the end of the day, people will give him more credit if he's just honest and transparent about why he voted the way he did.
I got us off on this rant, so we got to finish it.
Yeah.
Hyde is this, like I said, no federal money for abortions. He has been for that, and this was passed in the 80s or 90s?
I believe 80s, but I think it's been renewed over and over several times. Yeah.
And Biden has been for this from day
Reauthorized.
one. Now suddenly he's not for it.
Right.
I'm all for positions evolve, and I get that. What you thought 20 some odd years ago is perfectly natural to say I don't think this today. But again, in political terms, you have to control the rollout, the messaging, and the perception of how you put that out. And Biden just apparently blurting that out at one of his very infrequent campaign stops.
Right.
That is not what people want.
It's not the way to do it.
No.
And it's been a little bit of a pattern with him where he's done that. He's reacted. He hasn't been proactive.
Yeah.
And he's been in the hot seat about responding to, a statement that he said. And so he needs to get his team together, and they need to be cohesive and really have a talk track around all of these issues, particularly the ones that are controversial, where he took, he has a long voting history.
Yeah.
There were some controversial votes when you look at prisons and criminal justice and some of his votes on there. So he needs to iron out how he's going to respond and be ready. He can't be, caught flat-footed.
Maybe this is a generational thing, but what's wrong with just saying, I voted this way because at the time that was the way to vote, and I stand by it. I'm not up here to apologize for my 45-year history of service. Anybody who served as long as me, you got some wins, you're going to take a few losses, but I am not here to part of my appeal is my experience. I am not here to shift with the wins. I am not going to get drugged to the far edges of this party, and I'm going to demonstrate my main value of stability, experience by not going down that route.
He would, and I think that
Wouldn't
would be
people
very,
love that?
I think they would. It's
I
refreshing.
think they would too.
And they want, and two, it's a contrast with some of his opponents in the primary, because he can say, "I have this experience. I took tough positions.
Yeah.
I was in the trenches, fighting, and I'm gonna, stand by that because I'm going to take the fight to Trump, and because my opponents here on the stage with me, they don't have that experience. They haven't been fighting for decades like I have.
You know why Mayor Pete doesn't have anything in his history? Because he runs South Bend.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is a first-time senator.
First
so
term,
is Cory
yeah.
Booker.
Hasn't been
Come on.
reelected yet. Yeah.
Guys, I'm not even going down that path. And if you're looking for somebody that will apologize for everything, that ain't me.
Well, and most of Biden's opponents are fresh. They're green. They don't have that experience at all.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when people get my age and my experience level, they'll understand what I'm talking about.
Because everybody's going to have
question.
votes and things that they have to account for. Yeah.
All right, so we ran that to ground pretty good.
So let's go back to the Hatch Act.
Yes.
So that is the law that prevents federal employees serving in the executive branch from advocating for political positions and against and for political candidates in an official capacity in their executive branch positions.
So I think
long-standing law.
The president, the vice president, they're excused from this.
They are, yeah.
Because again, it's I think everybody realized you're constantly running for office, so be it.
Right. So you're talking about, the core staff of the president, chief of staff, different advisors, the cabinet officials. Those people are restricted. And, we have had numerous violations by Kellyanne Conway in that regard, as she has given, cozied up to, Fox News and others and given these, interviews where she's blasted Democrats directly by name, is basically speculated on who the president's opponents might be in the election.
And that's her role, isn't it?
What's that?
That's her role. Isn't that really the value she brings to her position?
Well, I mean, technically, although, her official position is,
senior advisor.
Yeah. Right. But it's, I don't know, it's not defined as a political position. And I think that's where it gets dicey.
And it's not a cabinet position.
It's not a cabinet position.
But she is part of the federal government, and she is part of the executive branch.
She is, yeah. And I think of like senior advisors in the past for other presidents, they have been more policy focused. And I can't think of, for Obama's administration, what comes to mind, but like George W. Bush, Karen Hughes, who was his communications person down in Texas, has a media background. She was a senior advisor to President Bush.
Yeah.
And I never heard her make those kind of statements. All of her statements were policy oriented on laws, things that they were trying to pass legislation.
Point. Your senior advisor a lot of times is a deep policy wonk.
Right.
Who knows
they help you navigate the trenches with the legislative branch, with Congress.
This is my agenda. I need you to put the groundwork together and then help us write this damn thing that we can push through. That's not Kellyanne Conway.
No.
She's a pollster. She's a political operative. She's a campaign manager.
She was brought in to manage Trump's campaign when it was going downhill and to resuscitate it.
So is this really a big deal? I really don't think
it's not a big deal, but I mean, it is a violation. I think the Trump administration would be smart to say, we're going to, make changes, make sure that this is an issue in the future and then move on. Instead, they completely say
they won't.
No, they deny it, that there's anything.
It was a political investigation. It's a lie. It's a hack-it job against anything the president does. You're right. Instead of saying, hey, guys, if we're going to win this, we've got to weave this path again through the upper Midwest, through these counties and attract independents. Isn't Kellyanne Conway, again, this is a completely political statement, isn't she an easy sacrificial lamb to make? Hey, I had to let Kelly go because she repeatedly did this. I understand her point. I support her enthusiasm. In some ways, I even encouraged it. That was a mistake. I'm sorry we had to let her go, but we're going to do better from here on out.
I agreed. I mean, out of all of the battles that the administration is fighting on multiple fronts, that's one of the easiest ones. Why go there?
Why pick this fight to save Kellyanne Conway's job when all you're doing is providing more of that evidence of chaos, perpetual kind of turmoil and dysfunction?
It would also solve the continuing dilemma of Kellyanne Conway's husband, who's very anti-Trump, who continues to tweet out, and you have Kellyanne in the opposite position, which again, I think in a normal administration, I could understand being on different sides of the political fence and having roles within different administrations. In this case, I don't know how that marriage works. That would be an interesting case study.
This isn't James Carville
it's
and
not.
Matlin.
No.
If you don't follow George Conway on Twitter,
you should, yeah.
Because he is brutal. And generally, he is considered one of the kind of intellectuals of the modern Republican Party.
He is. He's a conservative attorney, has long-standing reputation, ties to the Federalist Society. And I mean, shortly after Trump was elected, I think it was within the first 6 months, is when he went south on Trump and changed his tune, and has been that way ever since, and has not spared the president at all. No. And the president has then directly countered and attacked him personally.
Because, I mean, what's better than ripping on the guy whose wife is in your office every day? That's just got to be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, let's interfere in their marriage, because Trump has made a few of his tweets really kind of like cross the line where you're like...
I got to admit, that's the book I'd read. The Kellyanne Conway
I would read
book.
That too.
If she came out and said, I'm going to spill it all, including my psychology of why I did this, I would really, really be interested in
what I was thinking, at the time.
Here's the calculus I made of what I was going to get out of this. And once I got into the belly of the beast, here's how I continued on. That would be an interesting, on a political, psychological, all kinds of layers at that point, to hear what her story is going to be.
That would be fascinating.
So again, more chaos, more turnover, and more kind of instability. And in the top of all of this, you have Iran now, who's trying to provoke a response out of the United States by hitting a couple of oil ships.
We don't know a lot of information. There's 2 tankers. One of them is an oil tanker. The other, I think, is a cargo
and these
tanker.
These weren't American ships. But
no, one is Japanese and the other is owned by a Norwegian company.
Okay.
So, again, one is oil tanker, one is cargo. But both of them were attacked and bombed. Apparently, there were bombs that exploded on board.
I saw one on fire. They were flames. This was a fairly serious,
serious incident. This happened in the Gulf of Oman. It also follows attacks on other vessels over the last several months.
Yeah.
The administration, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, has pointed the finger at Iran. So this just broke today, is developing. We don't know much more yet. But again, it shows that, the situation with Iran, this is also, you have to remember that the president and his administration have gone after Iran, very, very heated terms.
Yep.
And Iran, itself has always been a powder keg because of where they sit in the Middle East.
This is where, right or wrong, and I've said this before, I don't have the background in the Middle East to make this determination, but Obama saw peace in the Middle East and the future of the Middle East through Iran, a modernized Iran.
Because Iran has a very young population.
Absolutely.
And a lot of them, I think, would be very susceptible to Western ideas. And, their leadership, of course, is a religious theocracy. And so if you can open those doors and get them open to the West, you have to remember, prior to the Ayatollah taking over in 1979, Iran was a secular country.
Yeah, absolutely.
So very different than it is today. And you have a lot of young people that are, hungry for modernization. And so, yes, they have nuclear capabilities. And, I think the Obama administration wanted to diffuse those capabilities as best as possible. And so you have Trump, basically, who is, decided to scrap that agreement. Which I think has
with no real plan,
has roiled our European partners because of now the uncertainty and security threat that's presented. And then you have the increase in just the aggressive posture and tone that the U.S. is taking simultaneously. So again, it's not a good situation.
But I think Obama tried to make the calculation, we're going to modernize Iran, and that's how we're going to change the situation on the ground in the Middle East. By doing so, by default, their power isn't an infinite, and influence isn't infinite. If you give it to somebody, you have to take it from somebody else.
Right.
And he took it kind of off of Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And right or wrong, and there's a lot of arguments you can make that, I don't know if that's the right way to do that. That was his approach. Trump has gone in and completely reversed that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he is...
It's no coincidence. I mean, these things don't happen in a vacuum, that Trump has solidified ties with Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And it explains why he has cozied up to them and Israel and refused to critique Saudi Arabia's policies, has acceded to Israel on Jerusalem being the side of the embassy. So there's all of these steps he's taken to reset the balance of power in the Middle East.
And I guess what's interesting is, with that being all of those facts you just laid out correct, what's Iran gonna do? Their only step is to start acting up.
Right.
Their only step now is to try to provoke the United States into some sort of limited action. You don't want to risk an all-out war.
No, we
if
can't.
You're Iran, and the U.S. is not putting boots on the ground again.
No way.
In the
There's
Middle
no
East.
appetite
That's not
for
going to
that.
happen. And again, I know this sounds cynical, but if you can poke Trump and the United States into bombing something, you can use that to
as
your
a pretense
advantage.
Right.
You can do all kinds of things with that politically at home.
Like you said, or like I said, it's a powder keg. You have one incident that starts a domino effect, and that's all it would take.
And the thing I will give Trump credit for, I don't think he wants to go to war with Iran or anybody. I think
John Bolton
has wanted to
Trump
pop the shit out of Iran for years.
Right.
I think with Trump being a pragmatist and sees everything as transactional, wars, that would be bad for business.
Yeah.
I'd rather sell you something than bomb you. And I think at the end that it's going to be interesting to see how far Iran is willing to push this. I think Pompeo is up for some military action. Bolton is.
Oh, absolutely.
If they keep this up, we have to. We can't let, they have the Strait of Hormuz, I think it's called,
right.
Both names. 25-30% of the world's oil passes through that, and it's under Iranian control. You can't let that type of energy production go unchecked if Iran continues or escalates bombing ships and things like that.
Right.
You can't let that go unchecked.
Not at all. So, yeah, it's dangerous. So we'll have to see where this goes today. And, the continued statements from the administration. And
yeah,
but again, this is kind of a trend line we're seeing where, the things keep ramping up.
Yeah.
The war of words has ramped up. The number of incidents have ramped up.
Well, Iran's not Iraq either.
No.
You're not going to invade. An invasion of Iran would be catastrophic. I mean, it would take everything we have. Not, of course, we could nuke Iran. I'm taking those off the table. If we were going to invade and occupy Iran like we tried to do with Iraq,
right,
you're talking, it would take almost the full force of the United States military.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be over fast.
No.
And you're talking hundreds of thousands of casualties.
Very deadly.
That's not, we're not at a spot, and we just don't have the tolerance for that right now.
Not at all.
Yeah. Have you watched Chernobyl yet?
No, I need to.
So the best thing about Chernobyl is after it ended, the Russian government has come out and said that was total bullshit. And to counteract it,
I did hear about that. They're making their own show,
their
right?
Own miniseries on Chernobyl.
Yeah, I heard
the truth that shows the American CIA was responsible for the Chernobyl explosion.
Right. Well,
Can't wait to see that one.
Me neither.
Netflix has got to pick that up when they get it done.
All of my coworkers though are like hooked on Chernobyl, so I need to watch it because everybody's talking about it.
Yeah, it's worth all of the conversation. It's pretty good.
It is. I did want to touch upon two kind of bipartisan things. I know we talk a lot about the craziness that happens on Capitol Hill and dysfunctional Congress. So number one, there's a piece of legislation that's being worked in a bipartisan manner to limit presidential emergencies. National emergencies,
I like that
the
one.
use of those, and that and to provide more checks. I don't know the details, but I know that there's several Democrats and Republicans behind it, so that's positive. The other thing that's been interesting, and this happened via Twitter, is AOC, and I don't know if we talked about this, coming together with Ted Cruz on
saw that
fighting lobbying by former members of Congress to basically ban lifetime bans on members of Congress.
But do you see where they spun that into? We just need more money.
Yeah.
We just need a raise. Not only do I need a raise, my whole staff needs a raise.
Right.
Because that's why this lure of lobbying is so intoxicating. It's all the money we can make. So if you just paid me more, few people would stop doing that.
Yeah, although you gotta, you're never going to get close to providing salary that's commensurate with what they can make in the lobbying sector.
Absolutely not.
But that revolving door is there; it exists, and I think it ultimately leads to corruption and to bribery. And so, that's a good first step. The other thing that I noticed was that Ted Cruz proactively tweeted just this past week to AOC about working with her to provide over-the-counter birth control for free. Did you hear that? Yes, I swear.
Are you sure this wasn't a fake account?
No, this is legit. There's articles about it. So yeah, check it out. Yeah. So I basically wanted to continue that streak, and he put it in the context of, hey AOC, how would you feel about over-the-counter birth control, being able to provide that at no charge as long as it's a clean bill, nothing else attached to it. There's no abortion measure, but we just make it stand alone. I haven't heard how she responded.
Doesn't that absolutely make sense?
It does. That should be a bipartisan issue, right?
Absolutely. Who would vote no on that?
You might have some hardline crazy people, but
this is what drives me insane. And we need to spend a whole hour here in the upcoming weeks talking about the death of the legislative branch in the United States.
Right.
Do you think Cocaine Mitch would bring any of those to the floor?
No, not at all.
No. Do you think Cocaine Mitch would even open a debate? Let's hear some vigorous Senate-style conversation about how this would... No.
Because they're in the personnel business. They're not in the
personnel business.
Deliberation and debate. That's not what they're about anymore.
We just don't care.
Yeah.
We had to get Mitch McConnell in this episode because he's Cocaine Mitch.
Yeah.
All right, that's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.